Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to wish yourself, family, staff of Parliament, members of opposition, members of government, and all Guyanese a Happy New Year. I also would like to congratulate the Senior Minister and his team for preparing this budget 2024, and those staff of the EPA, GGMC, and GSC specifically. Sir, before I continue, I have a couple of points that I would like to set straight at this National Assembly. And for the former Speaker, the Honorable Minister of Education, Priya Manik Chan. Mr. Speaker, on the records, the Good Hope and Yarracabra School were financed under our government and started to build, and was completed now under her ministry. In addition, Mr. Speaker, in 2013 and 2014, there were no teachers trained. And Mr. Speaker, I find it strange that the honorable member didn't realize that they were in government for 23 years. They pretend like that never existed and want to plug everything in a government that took over after 23 years or 5 years to work a miracle. Mr. Speaker, on another point, Mr. Speaker, on the point of the UG, the free. UG was free in this country, Mr. Speaker. In 1994, the PPP put $1,000 as the tuition fee. At that time, $1,000 was equivalent to $127,000, Mr. Speaker. In 2017, that $1,000 was equivalent to 200,000 Guyana dollars. So, Mr. Speaker, it was always the PPP who burdened the students with UG tuition fees, Mr. Speaker. Free education was in the Constitution of Guyana, Mr. Speaker, and we seem to forget that. And Mr. Speaker, it is our government that is touting and had in our manifesto that we will bring free education from nursery to tertiary, Mr. Speaker. And the concept that the government talk about free education, Mr., is highly misrepresentative, because the government is saying their free education will bound the students to be staying in Guyana, Mr. Speaker. So I want to make that quite clear, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister also boasted about constructions of new schools. But Mr. Speaker, I want to quote a paragraph from Subric News today. A teacher, and the headline goes like this: non-resident Paramakatoi teachers lament deplorable living quarters. And I will just quote the first paragraph to you, Mr. Speaker. As a quote: a teacher who is based in Paramakatoi, Region 8, Potaro Siparuni, is on the verge of calling it quits, as her plea for better living arrangement is not being met by the relevant authorities. And I will not quote the name, Mr. Speaker. Lamented her squalid living conditions of social media on the January 19th, showcasing the almost cave-in ceiling of the living quarters she has been assigned as a non-resident, Mr. Speaker. So this thing about building schools and not maintaining is a serious problems with management and governance in this country, Mr. Speaker. We keep building and not having the ability to maintain and to fulfill. Same thing in the health sector. My friend, my honorable members boasting about 12 hospitals. But do we have enough staff to accommodate those 12 hospitals? How do we maintain the current one that we have, Mr. Speaker? And I left that for my honorable shadow Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, this first ever $1 trillion budget approximately equals the sum of all 5 years of the coalition budget. The 5 times what the coalition had as a disposal in each of those 5 years. But the PPPC, in its own ways, is attempting to deceitfully mislead the people by comparing what the $1 trillion budget has with our $250 billion annual budget, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, Thank heaven the people are not illiterate, as the people thinks they are. Mr. Speaker, our people knows the budget are about priorities. They know budget tells who the government is. The philosophy and they know, Mr. Speaker, the people can see and feel. That is what the budget is. Feel, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is the government heart and soul is definitely not with the majority of the people who live in impoverishment, struggling day to day, make ends meet. While the 1% comprising families, friends, and favorite are hauling off the hog of the money. Mr. Speaker, the impure facts are that a meager 10% of the budget is going to the 1/3 of the people comprising of public servants and pensioners, with almost twice that amount, Mr. Speaker, is being handed out to the families and friends and favorite for the road constructions alone, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me repeat, a meager 10% of this budget is going towards the lower 1/3 of people, while almost twice that amount is going towards roads alone, earmarked to benefit families, friends, and favorite in the contracting business. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, budgets are always about setting priorities for the people. And it is crystal clear, Mr. Speaker, that the PPC priorities are starkly upside down to what the people want. Mr. Speaker, I will bet my life that if you ask the people, they will choose food over road, water over road, healthcare over road, and education over road, Mr. Speaker. However, sir, nothing could be more odds with the people's wishes than the revulsions or feeding the people being frequently expressed by the Vice President on many public utterances. And I quote, all the APNU AFC wants to do with the oil money is to feed people. We are happy that even the Vice President admits that we put the people basic need first, Mr. Speaker. Also, sir, may I remind this National Assembly that even the PPC, when it had somewhat of a conscience at the time, shouted our budget down, exclaiming to the top of their voices that we can't eat road. Well, Mr. Speaker, this characteristic flip-flopping by the PPC no doubt proves their lack of principle and unworthiness to its people. With commitments to only filling the pockets of their families, friends, and favorite, or Mr. Speaker, to be a little bit charitable on this beautiful afternoon. Maybe they come up with a new invention to make roads edible. Development, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I stood in this National Assembly and witnessed the passing of 5 budgets, totaling over $2.25 trillion, more than double of what the APNU AFC in 5 years of government. And what do we have to show for that, Mr. Speaker? We certainly can now say the Hero Highways, nor the Demerara Harbor Bridge, nor the Linden 4-lane bridge, nor the Mabril-Eteme Road. All this, sir, was financially secure under the APNU AFC government. You can ask my honorable friend David Patterson, sir. He will tell you and give you all the records. What they have, Mr. Speaker, for their development records is a Skeleton Sugar Factory. The Ambulance Falls Hydro Project, which is now postponed until 2027, Mr. Speaker. Still selling pipe dreams. The Specialty Hospital, the fiber optic cable, and now the gas to show project, Mr. Speaker. We're not too sure. It is worrisome, especially they don't have a financial plan to show the execution of that project, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these highly credible institutions will require stringent policies to manage these projects, just like the Norwegian fund, sir. And I must tell you that the AP and UFC government, that is the one that sought the release of the remaining funds after it was blocked for poor project management and accountability. Mr. Speaker, as I take a look into the non-oil sector and the natural resources, other than the oil, I was stunned by the performance of these sectors, as mentioned this morning by my Honorable Shadow Minister of Finance. And I want to look at gold, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as mentioned in the budget speech by the Honorable Dr. Ashni Singh, Honorable Member, where gold mining subsector contributed 6.1% of the non-oil GDP and 52.1% of the non-oil export in 2023. So this gives an indication that there is a serious contraction of the performance of the other non-oil sectors, Mr. Speaker. And let me put this in record. In 2020, gold contracted by 7.8%. In 2021, it contracted by 14.8%. And 2022, Mr. Speaker, it contracted by 2.5%. And in 2023, it contracted by 11.2%, Mr. Speaker. This is the record. So when my friend this morning, Mr. Honorable Member Joe Hamilton, was saying upward, 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 I am saying downward, 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 Mr. Speaker. This is what the record shows. Therefore, sir, if gold contributed 52.1% of export, which is more than half of the non-oil exports, then my conclusion in the non-oil sector are in deep, deep, deep trouble. There is no sustainable plan, Mr. Speaker, for the sector. Mr. Speaker, I have yet to see a strategic move by the investment committee of the Natural Resources Fund. Mr. Speaker, we don't know nothing what is happening there. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this will put pressure on our government after the 2025 election, Mr. Speaker, to come up with strategy to raise these numbers. And this is what we do, Mr. Speaker. We will create policy for a gold refinery, and the main thing is very important to set up these refinery structure, Mr. Speaker, because you have to measure your gold reserve with the US dollar and with your currency, Mr. Speaker. It is very important because the rise of BRICS will create a very bad effect on our dollars, Mr. Speaker. I see no plan for this, Mr. Speaker. Number two, Mr. Speaker, we are going to improve the monetary system by using state-of-the-art satellite system, Mr. Speaker. We will invest in the LiDAR system to ensure that we do the proper monitoring of the gold, Mr. Speaker. And we have to ensure that we invest heavily in training of the GGMC staff, Mr. Speaker. We're going to create a level playing field for all the small miners, Mr. Speaker, and all miners. We will ensure, Mr. Speaker, that small miners are given enough lands because their declaration contributed significantly to the overall performance of this sector. We will ensure that they have a seat at the table, just like we did with the Guyana Forestry Commission, Mr. Speaker. It was the AP and UAFC government. After 23 years, Mr. Speaker, install a small private sector representative, small and private sector representative on the board, Mr. Speaker. We will ensure the interests and concern of small-scale mining community at the highest level of decision-making within the GGMC, Mr. Speaker, contributing to government commitment to inclusive policy making. We firmly believe, Mr. Speaker, that the inclusion of small miners would mutually beneficial for fostering cooperation, dialogue, and progress within the mining sector, while also supporting the country goals for responsible resource management, economic growth, and inclusivity. Mr. Speaker, bauxite. We've talked about bauxite, Mr. Speaker. I have not seen any improvement in this subsector, Mr. Speaker. And I don't know what is the plan or any intention of that natural resources to get that over the bar, Mr. Speaker. Quarry, I must say the quarry has been improved at 98% as mentioned in the budget speak. And we all know that's because of the high money, Mr. Speaker, and every construction. And that is putting a pressure on the other sector like forestry, Mr. Speaker. In forestry, Mr. Speaker, the government half-year review last year has mentioned that they received a bankrupt forestry sector. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, it was the AP and UFC government that took over the Bankrupt Forestry Commission in 2015. An audit was done and concluded by Mr. Anand Gulsaran, sir. And the honorable member knows that. This report pointed out clearly that forestry was bankrupt. They were in a state of overdraft to amount of $90.245 million, Mr. Speaker. That is what we took over. So I wanted to set the record straight, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me give you another on the same audit, Mr. Speaker. There was an investment of $300 million to CLECO. When the board asked, when the auditor asked for the report, the instrument to show that request of allocation to CLECO for that investment, there was no record, Mr. Speaker. Later on, they received a letter, the forestry board received a letter stating that, oh, there was a phone call that was made by the minister that the $300 million should go to CLECO for investment. No record, Mr. Speaker. This is how they used to do business, Mr. Speaker. And let me give you the performance of the forestry sector, Mr. Speaker. 2019, I will start from 2019, Mr. Speaker. They had 93,861 cubic meter of logs, of logs. In 2020, 77,334. 2021, 74,487. And 2022, 63,676. And in 2023, up to the third quarter, 31,682, Mr. Speaker. And as the minister said that there was an increase of 5.4%. It's doubted, Mr. Speaker. If you see the trajectory is a downward trajectory we have, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
What is down now is your first tranche of time. You will need an extension.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you very much, honourable member. 5 minutes to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, what we'll do, and this is going to put pressure on us again, that we have to overhaul the entire management system, the management structure of the forestry, Mr. Speaker. We will ensure that Mr. Speaker, that we move the tenure of land from 3 years to 5 years for the small operators. And for the large operators, Mr. Speaker, we will move it from 5 years, 15 to 25 years, Mr. Speaker, so that you create an investment platform for investors to happen, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will change the permitting system based on geographic location, Mr. Speaker, because those in quarantine are different from those in Esquimalt. We will do that, Mr. Speaker. We can create a roundtable where all the stakeholders meet together, so all the government agencies, so that here we reduce the red tape, and one stakeholder has to go around after 5 ministries or 5 agencies to get the work done, Mr. Speaker, the permission, Mr. Speaker. We will strengthen the standard operation procedure, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that no manager will get up every morning and say, I will do this, I will do that. It will be based in a standard operational procedure, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the carbon credit, I call it a hoax, Mr. Speaker. And this is the reason. I've been talking to consultants in both Suriname and in Brazil. The carbon credits, Mr. Speaker, that if once or a company wants to buy carbon credit, that piece of area or that carbon that they're buying, let's say 10,000 tons, it has to be protected, Mr. Speaker. But here we have a system where the entire forest in the country has been assessed for carbon, and it was purchased by Hess company, Mr. Speaker, but they don't know exactly which part of this carbon they'll be bought. So that model will change, Mr. Speaker, where we're going to create a win-win-win situation for everybody and will benefit the community directly, Mr. Speaker. The model that we're going to put in government after we take over government in 2025 is going to benefit the community therefore, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the revolving fund. In the budget speech, Mr. Speaker, you have learned that the Honorable Minister of Finance mentioned 550 operators. 11 of those is the one who benefited from that revolving fund, Mr. Speaker. And what's simple because of what? Because, again, Mr. Speaker, the concept of revolving fund bought it from the private sector. So you have to understand, Mr. Speaker, that they don't understand the concept and model of the revolving fund. And therefore, only 11% were qualified out of 550 stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. Insignificant, Mr. Speaker. It's in the budget speech. It's in the budget speech. Mr. Speaker, as I come to the oil and environment, Mr. Speaker, and luckily we have signed this deal in 2016, Mr. Speaker, that rescue this economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the PPC only interest is to tear down the guardrails that we left in place for the cost-effective, safe, and environmentally sound management and oversight of the oil and gas industry. Foremost was the APCO-AFC 22-member oversight committee representing all demographics and organization of our society to determine how that oil money will be spent. However, Mr. Speaker, unabashedly, the PPC out of the blocks replaced this committee with 5 members team, all appointed by their government, Mr. Speaker. All. Mr. Speaker, as I'm coming to an end, the environment, Mr. Speaker, and let me turn to the environment. Let me say this, Mr. Speaker. Once again, despite this massive budget, we don't see anything close to investment needed for human capacity building to provide effective oversight and monitoring and to meaningfully expand services to the communities outside of Georgetown, Mr. Speaker. We are in deep trouble, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as if they don't give a darn about attitude of not providing the basic needs such as food, health care, and education to its people is not enough. The unlimited flaring, toxic water dumping, no EIA TPC has taken it to another level with a disastrous betrayal of the nation environment, Mr. Speaker. The government said there is no need for EIA for the gas control project, Mr. Speaker. Imagine that, a big project like that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government has taken things to an unbelievable limit of abandoning its own people and the people of the Caribbean to save Exxon money, when it had to sue to implement the coalition most reasonable legal requirements that Exxon have a parent company guaranteeing to recover the cost of any oil spill, Mr. Speaker. But most mind-boggling, Mr. Speaker, the government joined Exxon in appealing the judge's overwhelming decision in favor of the guaranteeing, including an Exxon deposit of US $2 billion. And yet, Mr. Speaker, just 1 minute, Mr. Speaker. And yet, Mr. Speaker, that $2 billion, when we try to find out if it's existed, Mr. Speaker, they file again and join to say that we should not go and ask for see that money, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, if we are to stay the course in this budget, as one of the movie I saw, Terminator Salvation, if we stay the course, we are dead. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Honorable Member and Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Honorable Member Hugh Todd.